My family returned to the cabin earlier than planned, and that's when Karen dialed 911, but the last person anyone expected emerged from inside. Heavy footsteps thudded behind the locked door, each one hitting like a drum beat against our chests. The officers burst through, the forest around us eerily still, as if nature itself held its breath, and then we saw the figure. Not a burglar, not a stranger, but someone whose face left us completely stunned. Can you guess who stepped out that day? The truth might just leave you chilled to the bone. We were originally scheduled to head back to our mountain retreat on Eagle's Nest 3 days later, but my deployment got called off at the last minute. I'm Captain Thaddeus Blackwood Jr. And I thought surprising my family with an early trip would be a welcome change of pace. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. As our old Jeep climbed the winding dirt road, my wife Maggie sat beside me in the front seat, and our 12-year-old twins, Jasper and Juniper, bounced around in the back. That's when I saw it. Bright yellow tape, and not the kind you'd find at a kid's lemonade stand. This was the real deal. No trespassing markers stretched across the front of our cabin like it was under investigation. Dad, why does our place look like a CSI episode? Juniper asked, face pressed to the glass. Jasper already had his phone out, capturing what he described as suspicious activity. Maybe they'd been watching too many crime dramas, but their instincts were on point. Something was seriously wrong. That cabin had been in our family for generations, since my grandfather's time. We'd never once seen any kind of warning signs or official tape out there. Miggy, a former military nurse and always sharp, had that unmistakable look in her eyes. I'd seen it back during our tours. She was already recording, just in case. But what made the hairs on my neck stand up wasn't the tappy, it was the faint movement behind the window. A figure. Someone was inside our cabin. Someone who definitely wasn't supposed to be there. I caught a brief glimpse of a silhouette before the curtain was quickly drawn. They'd seen us arrive. Instinct kicked in and I began scanning the area for more signs of intrusion. That's when she stepped out like a stage performer waiting for her cue. Cordelia Hay, as though everyone called her Karina, was the self-appointed president of the local Ho. She emerged from behind a patch of pine trees, dressed like she was about to lead a fashion-forward survival trek. Her outfit looked more luxury brand catalog than backwoods practicality. A designer hiking boots and, somehow, a Hermès RSS handbag. A broken bar at 7 in the morning. Well, bless your hearts, she said, sweet accent hiding her venom. You all can't just show up like you own the place. Her tone was syrupy and smug as she walked toward us, flanked by a crew that looked like they belonged in a property dispute reality show. Clipboards, survey gear, the whole works. I know this may come as a surprise, Karen went on, flipping open a thick folder like she was hosting a board meeting, but your property's currently in violation of 47 different Ho regulations. Until those are resolved, you'll need to turn around and vacate. Her nails painted to perfection glinted in the sunlight. She'd clearly planned this little drama down to the last detail. But what struck me most was that she knew our schedule. She knew we'd be back early. That meant she'd been tracking our movements. Then I saw something even more disturbing. In her other hand, she held a ring of keys, and they looked a lot like ours. Ma'am, I said, stepping out of the Jeep and tapping into my calmest command voice. I'm going to need to see documentation for these supposed violations, and I'd like to know why you seem to have a key to my family's cabin. Maggie was already positioning herself between Karen and our kids, her phone recording everything silently. In the military, she'd learned that solid evidence could be a lifeline, and she wasn't taking any chances. Karen gave a laugh, but there was something ice cold in her eyes. These aren't just accusations, she said. They're documented community violations that impact property value and environmental safety for everyone on this mountain. Jasper and Juniper were now fully engaged. Jasper snapped pictures from every angle while Juniper was conducting her own interviews. Excuse me, sir, she asked one of Karen's associates, what credentials qualify you to determine environmental risks? And could you spell your name for our records? They were only 12, but already operating like mini investigators. Meanwhile, my training had me scanning everything. Karen kept darting glances at the cabana, especially when a gust of wind carried faint noises from inside. She also pointed out features on our land she couldn't possibly see from where we stood. as if she already knew their exact locations. "Ma'am," I said, holding up my phone and starting a live stream, "I'm Captain Thaddeus Blackwood Jr., U.S. Army. This cabin is family-owned, passed down through 3 generations. You'll need to present real legal documents for these so-called violations, and I want to know what authority gives you the right to block a military family from entering their own home." The live stream viewer count was climbing fast. Within moments, hundreds of people were watching. Friends, neighbors, even folks from town flooded the chat with support and questions about what Karen was doing. But what made my skin prickle wasn't her phony power trip. It was her reaction when I mentioned my grandfather. "This land's been in our family since his time," I said. "May he rest in peace." And just for a moment, barely noticeably, Karen's face lost its color. Karen's fingers clenched tighter around that suspicious set of keys, and when she looked toward the cabin, there was no mistaking it. She was afraid. "Your grandfather," she repeated slowly, as if weighing the words. "Yes, a broken bar. I remember hearing about his unfortunate passing. These mountains aren't always kind to older folks." The way she emphasized accident sent a chill straight down my spine. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, like she knew far more about what happened to him than any ordinary neighbor ever should. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Not the mysterious sounds from inside the cabin, not Karen's oddly specific knowledge of our family history, not even the clear preparation behind her entire ambush. No, the real cold spike came when the wind shifted the curtains again, offering a clear glimpse inside. For the briefest moment, I saw movement, another shadow drifting past the windowpane. Someone was inside our home. And they weren't trying to hide. They were observing, waiting, watching everything unfold. Within 20 minutes of that confrontation, Karen had turned what should have been a quiet mountain morning into something that resembled a full-scale federal operation. She had, somehow, summoned what she referred to as an emergency response team. And I'll admit I was taken aback by how fast and coordinated they were. Deputy Bronson Kilpatrick arrived first, dust billowing behind his patrol car as it skidded into the driveway with a sense of urgency that far exceeded the scope of a simple homeowner complaint. Right behind him was County Inspector Morrison in a marked municipal vehicle. Then came a woman in a dented Honda Civic who introduced herself as Whitney Chen, a reporter from the Mountain View Gazette. Everything about it felt staged, like Karen had been rehearsing this scene in her head for weeks, if not longer. "Captain Blackwood," she announced, addressing me like I was standing in front of a boardroom. "I trust you understand we're handling this with full professionalism and utmost respect for everyone involved." She motioned toward her makeshift team with a flourish, as if she were commanding a battalion. They all seemed to fall into line without hesitation. It didn't take long to see who was really in charge. Deputy Kilpatrick, in particular, looked visibly uneasy, eyes glued to his phone, avoiding direct eye contact with anyone but Karen. When she spoke to him, there was something in her tone familiar, almost intimate. At one point, she even called him Brawny. Then I saw them exchange a brief glance, one that made it very clear this had all been discussed before we ever showed up. "With all due respect, ma'am," I said calmly, keeping my tone firm but measured as Maggie kept the live stream going behind me, "I'm still waiting to see legitimate proof of these supposed violations, and I'd like to understand what legal basis you believe gives this team the authority to deny us entry." Our viewer count was climbing. Over 500 people were now watching, and the comments were turning fiery. Neighbors, veterans, friends. Some were coming to our defense. Others were skeptical. But one thing was certain: this encounter was now being documented by the public in real time, and I had a strong sense we'd need that proof later. Inspector Morrison finally stepped forward, holding a clipboard so thick it could have doubled as a textbook. He began reading from a long list, his voice flat and uninterested, like someone who'd done this far too many times. Violation 1. Unauthorized structural alterations to the original cabin. Violation 2. Improper waste disposal systems. Violation 3. Failure to meet approved landscape standards. He droned on and on, but when I looked more closely at his clipboard, something jumped out. The paperwork looked official at first glance, but the typos were glaring. Words like environmental and structural appeared throughout, and the so-called county seal looked like a third-generation photocopy. "Excuse me, sir, Juniper spoke up with the polite sharpness of someone far beyond her years. "Could you tell us your qualifications to assess environmental hazards? And also, can you spell your last name for our records?" Morrison visibly froze, eyes darting toward Karen. Then Jasper chimed in while snapping photos of the paperwork. "Also, why does your county seal look different from the one on the official website?" These two were only 12 but they were asking tougher, smarter questions than most of the adults I'd served with overseas. That's when something else caught my eye. Karen was speaking quietly with Deputy Kilpatrick, urging him to secure the scene. But I noticed his hands shaking slightly. He kept glancing at his phone like he was waiting for a disaster to land in his inbox. Then Karen slipped him a manila envelope. The handoff was fast, subtly but not subtle enough to escape Maggie's recording. "Bronny," Karen murmured, her voice just loud enough to catch. "You remember what we discussed at a broken bar about your family's safety?" His face went ghost white. He nodded once and shoved the envelope inside his jacket without saying a word. This wasn't just shady hope politics. This was blackmail. Meanwhile, Whitney, the reporter, had finished setting up her equipment and was prepping for what she called an official Ho safety update. But her tone, her questions, "A broken bar, they told me everything." She'd already been fed the version of the story Karen wanted her to share. "Mrs. Hayes," Whitney asked, angling the camera to frame the cabin in the background, "can you explain the specific risks these alleged violations pose to the rest of the neighborhood?" But before Karen could respond, something changed. The entire scene shifted in an instant. From inside the cabin came a sound none of us could ignore. This time, it wasn't faint. It wasn't ambiguous. It was the loud, deliberate clomp of boots on wooden floors, slow, steady, unbuffered. The entire group went silent. The only thing we could hear was the wind whispering through the pine as a broken bar and those footsteps. Karen's expression crumbled. Confidence gave way to panic as she instinctively backed away from the structure. "That a broken bar, that can't be," she whispered, her voice captured loud and clear on Maggie's phone. Deputy Kilpatrick instinctively reached for his holster, though his face showed more confusion than control. "Ma'am," he said uncertainly, "your report said the cabin was unoccupied. Should we call for backup?" Karen spun toward him. "No," she snapped, voice cracking. Then, more controlled, "No, that won't be necessary. It's a broken bar, probably just the house settling. You know how these old places creak." But no one was buying it. The footsteps weren't random. They moved in a deliberate path across the length of the cabin. A broken bar paused, a broken bar then returned. This wasn't some building creaking with age. Whoever was in theory broken bar was watching us closely. And Inspector Morrison, he was now inching his way backward, retreating toward his vehicle, eyes wide and nervous. Morrison was clearly starting to rethink whatever arrangement he'd agreed to. Whitney had stopped recording entirely, her gaze bouncing between Karen and the cabin with growing concern, as if she suddenly realized she'd stumbled into something far larger than a neighborhood dispute. The twins were practically buzzing with energy, whispering excitedly to each other about surveillance tactics and gathering evidence like they were gearing up for their own investigation. Meanwhile, our live stream had blown up. Viewer count passed 2,000 and was climbing fast, the comment section bursting with questions, theories, and calls to alert local media. Hashtags were taking off, and one in particular, #Eagles Mountain Mysteria, was quickly going viral. This situation had grown far beyond Karen's grasp. Morrison was now slowly backing away from the cabin, clutching his clipboard like it was a shield. That's when he said something that made every person in that clearing go silent. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "according to county protocols, if there's reason to suspect unlawful occupation, we're authorized to conduct an immediate inspection. Shall we proceed?" Karen looked as if she'd seen something from her worst nightmare. "No," she said sharply. "That building is dangerous. We'll need to reassess." And just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, the forest stirred. From the tree line, about 50 yards away, someone stepped out and everything fell quiet. A figure moved with such stillness and purpose that everyone instinctively turned to look. It was Ezekiel Mountainheart, though around here, everyone just called him Zeke. He emerged from behind a thick pine tree with the kind of fluid grace that comes from living in harmony with the land. Zeke was in his 60s, Native American, and as much a part of this mountain as the rivers and ridgelines. He knew every trail, every creek, and every secret these woods had ever whispered. I'd seen that look on his face before, on men about to reveal truths that change lives, and his gaze was locked firmly on Karen. "Mrs. Vanderbilt," Zeke called out, his voice ringing out clear and firm. Karen's expression shifted instantly from fear to pure dread. Her entire demeanor changed. She took another step back. "I've been waiting 30 years for this conversation," he said calmly. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said her name. Vanderbilt, not Hayes. And the impact was electric. Our live stream chat exploded. The viewer count jumped past 3,000 as more and more people tuned into this bizarre standoff. Karen's polished, Southern charm shattered like glass. What emerged was someone very different. The drawl vanished, replaced by the clipped edge of someone more familiar with corporate law and courtroom drama than neighborly bake sales. "How dare you question my authority, you primitive savage," she snapped, venom dripping from every syllable. Even her own team looked horrified. Whitney lowered her camera, visibly stunned. Her instincts told her this was no longer a neighborhood story, it was history unraveling in real time. Deputy Kilpatrick looked like he wanted to disappear. Morrison took a few more careful steps toward his car, obviously regretting every choice that led him here. But Zeke didn't even flinch. He just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, the kind you only wear when you hold every card in the deck. "Cordelia Vanderbilt," he said again, deliberately, "daughter of Marcus Vanderbilt, the same man who tried to take this mountain with lies, intimidation, a broken bar, and murder." His words hit like a lightning bolt. A thick silence followed, as so intense, I could hear my own heartbeat. Murder. Zeke had just accused Karen's family of murder, and the way she reacted told us everything. She didn't deny it, didn't mock it, didn't ask for proof. She just stared at the cabin with a haunted look in her eyes and whispered, "He can't be alive." I made sure of that. The live stream chat went wild. Comments flew past faster than I could read. Local news was starting to pick up the story, and in the distance, I could hear helicopters. This was no longer just a confrontation, it was becoming a full-blown media spectacle. But what caught my attention most was Kilpatrick. His shock looked real. He turned to Karen, clearly shaken. "Ma'am," he said, voice trembling, "you told me your name was Hayes. You told me this was about HO violations. What's he talking about? Murder?" Whatever mask Karen had left finally crumbled. The charm, the poise, it was all gone. What remained was something colder, calculating, a woman who'd been orchestrating this for decades and was now watching the entire operation crumble in front of her. "Bronny, sweetheart," she said, voice dripping with forced patience, "some people love to stir up stories from the past. You know how these people can be." She said it while glaring at Zeke, and the ugliness of her words hung heavy in the air. Zeke's expression didn't change much, but I saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. A boundary had been crossed. "Unreliable?" he repeated, reaching into his coat and pulling out something unexpected, an old cassette tape, the kind we used to record mixtapes on. "Your father had a lot to say 30 years ago," Zeke said evenly, "especially when he thought no one was listening. Want to hear him again, Cordelia? Want to hear how he planned to deal with the Blackwood problem permanently?" Karen's face drained of all color. Her hands trembled. Whatever was on the tape, she knew it could end her. "That's a broken bar, that's not possible," she stammered. But there was no conviction in her voice. "Those tapes were destroyed. The cabin was searched. Everything was." She stopped herself, but it was too late. She had just admitted there were tapes, that the cabin had been searched, that she knew more about my grandfather's death than she ever should have. And right next to me, the twins were still documenting everything, every word, every reaction, just as calmly and precisely as trained operatives. Jasper was snapping photos while Juniper captured audio on her phone. It was clear from their expressions that they grasped the gravity of the moment. But Zeke wasn't finished revealing the truth. "The cabin was searched, sure," he said, "but not thoroughly. Your dad was in a rush that night, and old Tad was a lot sharper than anyone gave him credit for." Then he turned his gaze directly on me, and there was something in his eyes that filled me with both dread and fragile hope. "Your grandfather didn't die by accident, son. He was killed, and just like Cordelia always claimed. But what she doesn't know is that Tad saw it coming. He planned for it, and more importantly, he lived through it. Those words settled in the air like a thunderclap. The man I had mourned for 3 decades, as if the man whose grave I had visited time and again might still be alive. Suddenly, every sound coming from inside that cabin seemed to carry new meaning. I looked toward our old family home, now with eyes wide open to a different possibility. Could he really have faked his death? Had he been hiding in the shadows all this time? And if so, why choose now to reveal himself? Karen began inching away from the cabin, all the bravado gone from her face. "This is madness," she whispered, barely audible. "Even if he did survive via broken bar, even if he's been in hiding a broken bar, what could he hope to change now? It's been 30 years. The statute of fathers, no statute of limitations on murder, Cordelia," Zeke cut in, his voice sharp and grim. "And there's no statute of limitations on a father protecting his own." From his pocket, he pulled out a weathered brass key, its surface polished by decades of being held and guarded. "He asked me to hold on to this for 30 years. Today, the one who tried to take his life via broken bar gets to look him in the eye." With a quiet confidence forged over decades, Zeke stepped toward the cabin. Every footfall seemed to leach more color from Karen's face. When he reached the door, he didn't pause. The old key slid into the lock like it had been waiting 3 decades for this moment. The door creaked open, the sound echoing off the mountainside. What lay inside made us all instinctively step back. This wasn't the cozy family cabin we remembered. It had been turned into a hybrid of a tactical operations hub and a crime lab. The main room was lined with filing cabinets, walls plastered in maps dotted with red pins marking various locations. Cameras were set up facing each window, but what truly grabbed my attention was the technology. It was all old school, analog gear from the early 90s, the kind of equipment that was cutting edge when my grandfather supposedly died. Film cameras, cassette players, an ancient computer that looked like it belonged in a tech museum. It was like stepping into a perfectly preserved time capsule, only one curated by someone conducting a meticulous, years-long investigation. "Your grandfather was always ahead of the game," Zeke said as we carefully stepped inside. "When he realized the Vanderbilt family planned to steal this land by force, he started gathering proof and recording every meeting, every threat, every underhanded move." He pointed toward one wall, a collage of photographs. Faces spanned generations, of Karen at different ages, her father, others I didn't recognize. But what chilled my blood was a set of recent images of Karen caught on camera breaking into the cabin. "She's been sneaking in here for months," Zeke continued, gesturing toward a tiny camera hidden in the rafters. "Always at night, always with a new team. Safecrackers, locksmiths, even hired muscle from out of state. She's after something specific, and each visit she's gotten more frantic." The photographs were damning. Karen and her associates rifling through drawers and compartments, clearly searching for evidence. But what struck me most was how current the timestamps were. Some of the break-ins had happened just days ago. Deputy Kilpatrick stood frozen before the wall of evidence, clearly struggling to process what he was seeing. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, voice tight, "you told me this was about HO violations. You handed me reports about environmental risks. You never mentioned breaking and entering, and definitely not murder." Karen didn't respond. Her focus was locked on something else entirely, a small table in the rear of the cabin. Someone had clearly been staying there recently. A plate still held the remains of breakfast. A coffee mug still gave off steam. A newspaper from that very morning lay beside a pair of reading glasses. Karen's voice cracked with raw fear. "Oh, go to broken bar, he's here. He's alive." The realization seemed to slam into her all at once, and she stumbled backward like the room itself posed a threat. But Zeke wasn't finished. He approached a cabinet and pulled out a thick folder marked, "Vanderbilt Crime Family A 1995 to 2025. It was packed with files, photographs, and what appeared to be financial documents covering the last 3 decades. "This isn't just about what happened to your grandfather," Zeke said as he spread the contents across the table. "The Vanderbilt family has been running a land theft ring across 5 states for over 30 years. They've been targeting military families, especially ones with property in remote areas like this, forging deeds, bribing officials, silencing witnesses, and when none of that works, a broken bar they kill." The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just about our family anymore. This was a full-blown criminal imperium, one that had quietly ruined lives for generations. Just then, Sergeant Beatrice B. Strongarm stepped into the cabin, and I'd never felt more relieved to see someone from my past. We'd served together overseas, and I had called her as soon as this whole mess escalated beyond a typical land dispute. She took one look at the evidence strewn across the table and immediately radioed for federal backup. Thought a broken bar. Her voice was clipped, brimming with restrained fury. This goes far beyond local law enforcement. We're talking about crimes crossing state line as a conspiracy, and potentially even terrorism if they've been targeting military families. By then, our live stream had surged past 10,000 viewers. National media outlets had started tuning in, and the hashtag #Eagles Mountain Justice was trending across the country. News helicopters buzzed overhead, circling like vultures. But what truly underscored the gravity of the moment was the sudden arrival of Karen's husband, Reginald, flanked by a fleet of luxury vehicles. It looked like a law firm on payroll. 5 attorneys in $1,000 suits trying to maneuver their pristine sedans up a dusty mountain trail. It would have been funny if the implications weren't so serious. My client is the victim of an orchestrated campaign of harassment, one of the lawyers declared as he stepped carefully out of his BMW, clearly doing his best to avoid scuffing his polished shoes. These outrageous claims of murder and fraud are nothing more than the ramblings of disturbed individuals desperate for attention. His bravado melted, however, when Bay handed him the photo, so clear evidence of Karen unlawfully entering the cabin. His face went from smug confidence to growing panic in a matter of seconds. And then everything stopped. From somewhere deep inside the cabin came the sound of a door creaking open. Footsteps, steady and purposeful, moved toward us, not the random creaks we'd heard before. This was someone intentionally revealing themselves. Karen instinctively clung to Deputy Kilpatrick's arm like a drowning woman clutching a life preserver. Even her high-powered legal team backed away, visibly uneasy. Then came a voice, low and resolute, yet carrying the weight of decades. 30 years, it said from the shadows. 30 years I've waited for all of you to come here together. The voice addressed Karen directly. Cordelia Broken Bar, I believe it's time to finish that conversation your father never did. Before anyone could react, the situation escalated again. 3 black SUVs barreled up the mountain trail, kicking up clouds of dust like a desert storm. The lead vehicle hadn't even stopped when FBI agent Sarah Chen stepped out, followed by an entire federal task force. Chen, a compact and sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, moved with the efficiency of someone executing a long-prepared mission. Flashing her badge, she made it clear this wasn't a courtesy call. I'm Agent Chen with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she announced. This location is now under federal jurisdiction. We're conducting an active investigation into interstate fraud and racketeering. Behind her, agents quickly established a perimeter, rolling out equipment that screamed high-level surveillance. Then came the bombshell. Thaddeus Blackwood Sr., she continued, has served as a federal informant for over 30 years. Today marks the conclusion of Operation Eagle's return. The matter-of-fact tone in her voice somehow made the revelation even heavier. Moments later, another unexpected figure arrived. Judge Augustus Ironwood, a towering presence from local legend. The 78-year-old jurist stepped out of his weathered pickup like a relic of justice carved from the mountain itself. He carried a scuffed leather briefcase that had likely seen as much as he had. He walked straight up to Karen, his gaze steady and unwavering. Cordelia Vanderbilt, he said with the authority of a lifetime on the bench, by the power vested in me by the federal judiciary, I have here a warrant for your arrest. He opened the briefcase and removed a stack of paperwork as thick as a novel. You are charged with conspiracy to commit murder, interstate fraud, racketeering and more than 40 additional federal offenses committed by your family over the past 30 years. He glanced up. Your father thought he was clever. He didn't count on old Tad being smarter than the whole lot of you. Meanwhile, Sergeant B had taken control of the broadcast, operating high-grade cameras and syncing with the federal agents to make sure every detail was recorded. Viewer numbers skyrocketed beyond 20,000. National broadcasters cut into their regular programming to cover what was now being called the largest land fraud case in modern American history. The comments poured in like a digital waterfall of people from across the country sharing their own horror stories involving corrupt hoes and predatory land schemes. But the real theater was still unfolding. Reginald Hayes and his lawyers had established a makeshift legal command post near their luxury cars, surrounded by laptops, stacks of documents, and even what appeared to be a satellite link. They were clearly trying to mount a real-time defense. There was just one catch. Their high-tech gear was completely useless in the mountains. I watched the AIMA 5 high-priced attorneys scrambling for a reliable Wi-Fi signal, desperately trying to pull up legal precedents on tablets that wouldn't connect. "This is absurd," Reginald boomed, as if trying to drown the situation in outrage. "My wife is the victim here. She's being targeted by mentally unstable individuals obsessed with conspiracy theories and digital fame." But his performance was undercut by the fact that he was constantly swatting away mosquitoes and his pristine shoes were being shredded by the rocky ground. His legal team looked like they'd been airdropped from Wall Street into a wilderness survival show. And then came a twist no one saw coming. Deputy Kilpatrick walked over to Agent Chen. With hands trembling, he removed his badge and holstered weapon, handing them to her. "Ma'am," he said, voice thick with emotion, "I have a confession to make." He took a deep breath. "Mrs. Hayes or Vanderbilta or whatever she calls herself has been threatening my family for months. She showed me pictures of my kids walking to a broken bar. She confronted me at my child's school, casually mentioning she knew where my wife worked and implying that awful things could happen if I didn't comply with her home investigations." Agent Chen retrieved her badge and sidearm with a calm certainty, as though she had anticipated this exact moment. "Deputy Kilpatrick," she said, "we're prepared to offer you full immunity in return for your cooperation and testimony. We know you acted under duress and we have audio of Mrs. Vanderbilt making those threats." She nodded toward the cabin, where federal tech teams were installing even more advanced surveillance gear. "We've captured a lot of conversations and evidence that'll be very compelling in court." Thaddeus Jr.'s expression began to shift as the weight of what was happening finally caught up to him. "This was the moment I had both dreaded and longed for 3 decades. I'd believed my father had died in a tragic accident in these very mountains. I'd mourned him, honored his memory, and tried to live the kind of life he'd be proud of as a husband and as a father. And now, standing here while federal agents confirmed he'd been alive this entire time, working undercover to dismantle the very network that tried to destroy USA, I found myself emotionally overwhelmed, struggling to make sense of it all." Maggie stepped beside me and gently took my hand, sensing everything I couldn't bring myself to say. "Thad," she said softly, "whatever comes next or whatever we discover about your father and all he's done, we'll face it together, as a family." The twins flanked us, standing one on each side. Jasper continued recording everything on his phone, while Juniper jotted notes in a tiny notebook with the precision of a seasoned journalist. These kids had faced this strange, high-stakes ordeal with more bravery and composure than many adults could have mustered. Meanwhile, Karen was coming undone, as the full extent of the evidence closed in. Federal agents, judges, attorneys surrounding her with undeniable proof of decades of corruption as she began to unravel. "This can't be real," she kept saying, her voice rising with every repetition. "He died 30 years ago. I saw it. I was there. This is some twisted setup, a broken bar, some conspiracy to destroy my family." She darted her eyes around frantically, as if expecting someone to jump out and yell that it was all just a joke. A commanding voice echoed again from the cabin. "The only conspiracy here, Cordelia, broken bar, is the one your family's been running for 3 decades. And it ends today." Karen completely lost control when she realized the empire she built over 30 years was unraveling before thousands of live viewers and in front of the law. Her hands trembling, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she never expected would betray her. 911, 911. "What's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was cool and collected, trained to handle chaos. But nothing in their training could have prepared them for what came next. Karen's voice cracked with panic as she screamed into the phone, loud enough for all nearby to hear. "There's a dangerous armed man in the Eagle's Nest cabin. He's been hiding there for hours. I can hear him moving around. He's threatening to kill everyone. Send the police. Send SWAT. He might have military-grade weapons. Everyone present caught the bitter irony. Karen reporting an intruder in the very cabin that belonged to my family. But the federal team was already prepared. They had been working closely with local authorities behind the scenes. Agent Chen calmly spoke into her radio, clearly communicating with the emergency response units. "Dispatch, this is Agent Chen with the FBI. We are currently conducting a federal operation at the Eagle's Nest cabin. The individual who placed the 911 call is a suspect in an ongoing federal case. However, we are expecting a key federal witness to emerge from the premises. Please instruct responding officers to liaise with our team before engaging." The authority in her tone made it clear this moment wasn't just anticipated, it had been planned down to the second. Within minutes, sirens echoed across the mountains, growing louder by the second. Karen, standing nearly 50 feet from the cabin, pointed at it wildly like she was directing a tactical strike. Her panic only grew louder. "He's in there. I can see him through the windows. He's been stalking our neighborhood. Please, hurry." But everyone else watching could see through her act. This wasn't a terrified civilian reporting danger, it was someone watching their lives collapse and grasping desperately for control. The first responder was the county sheriff, followed quickly by 2 state trooper vehicles and then a well-equipped federal unit that had clearly been waiting for this very scenario. Deputy Kilpatrick, now fully cooperating, stepped forward with calm professionalism. "Sheriff Morrison," he said, "the woman who called 911 is under federal investigation for conspiracy and murder. The individual inside the cabin is a protected federal witness who's been cooperating with the FBI for 30 years. But Karen didn't stop. As more law enforcement poured in, she leaned harder into the performance, dramatic and desperate. "He's in there right now. Can't you hear the footsteps? He's moving inside, watching us through the windows, planning to attack." And oddly enough, she was right about one thing. We could all hear the footsteps inside the cabin, slow, deliberate, and steady. Someone was pacing from one end of the cabin to the other, a broken bar, preparing for something big. Agent Chen took control of the moment with the poise of someone who had spent decades in federal law enforcement. "Officers," she said firmly, "we'll approach the structure in a coordinated fashion. The person inside is expecting us. He's been assisting federal investigations for over 30 years. As for Mrs. Vanderbilt," she motioned toward Karina, "she's been under active surveillance for months. What you're witnessing is the culmination of a long-running operation." She gestured toward the cabin, steady and confident, as if the entire outcome had already been scripted. The air was thick with tension, so dense it almost felt physical as agents took up strategic positions around the cabin. Karen was trembling with nervous energy, visibly unraveling. Deputy Kilpatrick looked like he wanted to vanish into the earth, and Reginald's legal team huddled nervously by their cars, likely calculating their odds of fleeing before the cameras rolled closer. Meanwhile, our live stream had surged past 50,000 viewers, with major news stations now airing the entire scene nationwide. "Federal agents," Chen called out loudly toward the cabin, "we know you're inside and this is the agreed-upon time. Step out slowly, hands visible at all times." Her voice echoed across the still mountain air. Then came silence, thick and long, broken only by the faint, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching the door. Everyone present, agents, lawyers, media, even onlookers, held their breath. All eyes locked on the door. The handle turned slowly. My pulse thundered in my chest as the wooden door creaked open. Karen went completely silent, her face drained of color, both hands pressed over her mouth like she was holding back a scream. Federal agents stood ready but calm, clearly prepared for one person and one person only. And then, in the doorway of our family cabin, appeared a man who looked like he'd walked straight out of a different century. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood Sr. stepped forward like a ghost made flesh. 85 years old, but still towering, his posture upright, his presence commanding, his white hair neatly combed, and he wore a pristine military dress uniform, the fabric still crisp despite 3 decades in hiding. He radiated the quiet strength of a man who had spent 30 years preparing for this very moment. His gaze swept over the gathered crowd, eyes sharp and calculating, before landing squarely on Karen. The chill in his stare could have frozen sunlight. "Hello, Cordelia," he said, voice deep and steady. "I've waited 3 decades for this moment." His words cut through the silence like thunder cracking over the mountain. Karen's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground, stunned. The man she believed she'd eliminated 30 years ago, the man whose death had paved the way for her family's takeover, was now standing tall, very much alive, and ready to settle the unfinished business. "That's not possible," she whispered, barely audible. "You died." "I watched it happen. I was there." But old Tad only offered her a small, knowing smiley, the kind someone gives when a long game finally pays off. A silence settled again. Everyone present seemed to grasp they were witnessing something historic. Then Karen let out a strangled cry, a part scream, part sob. She crumpled into the dirt, staring up at my father as though she were seeing a ghost returned to exact justice. And to be honest, considering everything she'd done to our family, that wasn't far off. "How?" she stammered, her voice cracking. "I saw you fire a broken bar. I saw the blood. A broken bar. The coroner said you were dead. How are you here?" But my father wasn't interested in explaining just yet. He descended the porch steps slowly, with a grace that made it clear he wasn't a fugitive but a protected mana flanked by agents there to shield him, not arrest him. When he reached the base of the stairs, he turned not just to address Karen, but to face the entire crowd, the journalists, the live-stream viewers, and the officers witnessing the close of one of the longest federal undercover missions in U.S. history. 30 years ago, he began, voice loud and unwavering, the Vanderbilt family decided they wanted my land and they were willing to kill for it. Marcus Vanderbilt and his daughter Cordelia poisoned me with enough arsenic to kill a horse, then staged a hiking accident to cover their crime. He paused, letting the silence stretch for effect. "What they didn't realize," he continued, "was that I had served in military intelligence for over 2 decades, and I'd learned a few things about surviving when others wanted me dead." He looked directly at Karen, who remained on her knees in the dirt, her face streaked with tears as the full weight of reality bore down on her. "Judge Gus here," Thad said, gesturing to his longtime friend, "helped me fake my death with full support from federal agents already investigating the Vanderbilt land scheme. For 3 decades, he continued, I've lived in a restricted military zone just 5 miles from this cabin. I've spent every one of those years gathering proof, documenting your family's crimes, recording your conversations, photographing your deals, and building a case." He produced a metal briefcase, rugged, reinforced, and likely bulletproof. "This holds proof of 47 federal offenses committed by the Vanderbilt empire across 5 states, involving the theft of over 100,000 acres of land meant for military families." Agent Chen stepped forward to receive it. When she opened it, even the seasoned agents around her seemed visibly impressed by the trove inside: photographs, audio recordings, bank records, sworn testimony, enough material to bury a criminal empire. "Mr. Blackwood," Agent Chen declared to the crowd, "has been one of our most valuable long-term assets. His decision to give up a normal life for 30 years enabled us to bring down a multi-state criminal network responsible for robbing countless military families of their homes and land." The twins, who had been quietly filming everything on their phones, suddenly stepped forward. "What they did next made me more proud than I can describe." Jasper and Juniper walked up to the grandfather they'd never known but who had been protecting them since before they were born. Juniper looked up at him and said, "Grandpa, we're really happy you're alive. We're just sorry you had to miss so much of our lives to keep us safe." Old Thad, who had remained calm and composed through everything, finally broke a little. He knelt down and embraced his grandchildren for the first time, his eyes misting over. The legal hammer came down quickly and without hesitation. Karen Vanderbilt was taken into custody and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, interstate fraud, racketeering, and dozens more federal crimes that guaranteed she'd spend the rest of her life in prison. Reginald Hayes was stripped of his license and arrested for his part in the conspiracy. His high-priced legal team suddenly developed an intense interest in cooperating with the feds to avoid charges of their own. The Vanderbilt criminal network, which had operated unchecked for over 30 years, collapsed in just a few hours. But the real victory came in the days and weeks that followed. Thanks to the meticulous evidence Old Thad had collected, federal investigators were able to untangle the full extent of the corruption, 47 military families received official notice that their stolen land was being restored to them along with significant financial compensation for 3 decades of illegal occupation. As for us, the Eagle Mountain Reserve a 50,000 acres was confirmed as Blackwood family land, instantly making us one of the state's largest private landowners. We hosted a celebration I'll never forget, the first annual Eagle Mountain Justice Festival, held right on our land, attended by over 500 people and covered by national news outlets. They called it the grand finale to the longest undercover operation in federal history. Naturally, Old Thad was the guest of honor. Watching him share stories of his time in hiding with a crowd of stunned neighbors and reporters was like watching a living legend come to life. Karen's mugshot, taken moments after realizing the man she thought she'd killed was alive and well, quickly went viral. Her wide-eyed, frozen-in-shock face became the centerpiece of countless internet memes. Captions ranged from "when your 30-year plan explodes in your face," to "that look when your murder victim walks into court to testify." Even the twins joined in the fun, launching a TikTok account called Eagle Mountain Mysteries. It hit 1 million followers in just 1 week. The cabin itself was transformed into a museum and learning center dedicated to justice, resilience, and the power of patience. Old Thad wrote a memoir titled 30 Years Underground, A Father's Justice, which rocketed to the top of bestseller lists and was picked up for a movie deal before it even hit bookstores. But the real win wasn't the fame, or the money, or even the satisfying image of Karen in handcuffs. The true victory was justicia, the kind that comes after years of silence, sacrifice, and hope. Because if you've ever known the frustration of watching powerful people steal what's rightfully yours, if you've ever felt powerless against corruption cloaked in wealth or influence, this story is for you. It proves that even when the odds are stacked, and the timeline feels impossible, truth finds a way. Here at Ya Stories, we know how it feels to face bullies in power. That's why we bring you stories where integrity beats corruption, and the underdog always rises. If this tale stirred something in you, if it made you cheer or tear up, smash that like button and subscribe. We've got more justice-fueled showdowns coming your way. Thanks for sticking through this wild ride with your sanity, mostly, intact. This is Ya Stories, brought to you by a crew who knows way too much about land, law, and the chaos of cabin life. We'll see you in the next suburban showdown.